So as we come to wrap this entire study up, let me remind you that we've been through in Moses' life three different phases. The Egyptian phase, 40 years, most scholars would say. The Midian phase, where he's a shepherd, 40 years. And then the leader of Israel, 40 years. Two-thirds of his life spent preparing, and one-third of his life spent actually accomplishing. So what we see is he spent two-thirds of his life learning to be. That's what he was doing. He was learning to be. Then he learned to make a difference. Now, part of that he learned in the first two-thirds of his life by doing it the wrong way. Now he's coming back in the last third of his life and he's learning to make a difference in a positive way. He's learning to do it right. So you got learning to be who God made me to be, learning to make a difference. Then it's learning to give direction, because once you begin to have some success, people will allow you to direct them and give direction in their lives. Then there's learning to build structure so that we can actually build something that can grow beyond us, so that we can build something that's bigger than just my leadership capacity, learning to build structure, learning to build teams. And then there's learning to leave a movement. In the end, there's an end. None of us are going to live forever. None of us are going to serve forever. None of us are going to lead forever. In the end, there's an end. And so the question becomes, what am I shooting for when that end comes? What am I after when that end comes? How do I want to be remembered? So let me take a few of these and let's look at a few spots toward the end of Moses' life. Exodus chapter 34, I'm going to read verses 29 to 32. And it reads like this. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware, this is the second time he's come down, watch, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he has spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant. His face was glowing because he'd been in the presence of God, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commandments the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. Listen, when you're in the presence of God, I need to start here. When you're truly in the presence of God, when you are truly emanating the Spirit of God, it makes people uncomfortable. Oftentimes, people will look at you and say, "How did you know this?" or "How did you know that?" or "What is it about you? Something about you's got me kind of freaked out." And it's often the presence of the Holy Spirit of God, because they're not familiar with that. They're not comfortable with it. This is what's going on with Moses. But here's what I want you to understand about that. There's a phrase that is used a great deal, a Latin phrase, imago Dei. It means the image of God. As leaders, I think the heaviest weight we carry as leaders, especially as pastors, is that it is our job to be, at times, the physical image of God to our people. I don't mean by that they see us and they worship that. I don't mean that. I don't mean that. I mean by that they see the presence of God coming off of us, and they experience the presence of God through us. You see, God's called us to be his representatives in this world. I got to be honest. I believe that's true for any leader, but especially for a pastoral leader. God's called us to be his image, his representative in the world. We are to live out and be the image of God. And when we become that, we begin to practice a ministry of presence. Just us being there makes people believe that God's there. Our showing up makes people believe that God showed up. Now it's not really true. It's not like that. It's not like God's not already there before we get there. But when we show up, there's this, every pastor experiences it at some point in their ministry. When you walk into a room and a family is bereaved, or a family is struggling, or somebody's in trouble, or someone's been put in jail, and you walk in because you're showing up to help, and the family just goes, "Oh, Pastor, I'm so glad you're here." And all of a sudden you realize it's not you. They're not reacting to you. They're glad you're there, But they're glad you're there because you represent the God that they need. You are not the God they need, but you represent that. And that ministry of presence becomes so meaningful. I often talk about my grandfather Freeman. And I often talk about him in these terms because it seemed to me that my grandfather Freeman just had a red phone in his room somewhere that went directly to God. And when he picked up the phone, God would say, "Yes, Robert, how can I help you?" And so it just seemed that Grandpa could just pray the Spirit down at any point for any reason. And I always remember that. And I always know I had to make a serious decision one time in my young life. And I had to decide what I was going to do. And I went to my grandfather and I said, "Would you help me do this?" Now, I didn't do that because I had no one else to help me. I did that because I knew that if God told him this was the right thing, he'd do it. But if God told him it wasn't the right thing, he wouldn't do it. So I was basing that decision in my life on my grandfather's relationship with God. You say, "Pastor, that's a bad idea." No, it was a great idea. It worked perfectly. He didn't help me. I knew I wasn't supposed to do it, and it wasn't where I was supposed to be to start with. I ended up where God wanted me, and my grandfather knew it. Why? Because he was all that smart? Well, he was. He was a very smart man. But no, it was because he had, how do I say this, marinated in the presence of God to the point that God's presence, God's person, God's power, God's leadership emanated through him. And you just sensed it. That's who we need to be. A ministry of presence before the people that we lead. Exodus chapter 34, verses 29 to 32 says this. "Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth." Now, I'm going to throw you a curveball with this, and then I'm going to explain why. You've got to be the imago Dei, the ministry of presence. And you say, "Well, okay, you just read about humility. You got to be humble." That's what you're going to say. You got to be humble. No, you got to be in charge. You've got to be in charge. You say, "Why in the world would you put in charge with this verse that's talking about humility?" Because real leadership authority comes from a strong, humble heart. That people will follow that all day. Look, leadership is by leader, not by committee. When it says that Moses was a very humble man, it meant that Moses would hear from Jethro. It means that Moses would hear from the people around him. It means that Moses would hear from God. Moses would listen to the advice that was given to him by any number of people. Moses would try his best to do what was right. He would understand he didn't always have the right answers, but he knew God did or someone else did, and God would send that someone else to him to give him the right answer. He was humble enough to know he didn't know it all. And yet he was strong enough to know that he had to make some decisions. Sometimes when we hear this humble word, this humility word, when we hear this, we think as leaders, well, we should just then do what we have to and let other people lead. We shouldn't try to be domineering leaders. We should let other committees and groups decide. Listen to me very carefully. Leadership is by leader, not by committee. Listen carefully. Committees always choose beige, when in the moment you might need plaid. You know, it takes somebody who's brave to choose a bright orange over a beige. It takes someone with guts to stand on their own to choose plaid over a simple beige. But committees always choose beige. Committees always choose safe. Sometimes the leader needs not. No committee would have voted to walk through the Red Sea. Go back to the Red Sea. When God split the waters and the waters are split and there's dry land, no committee would have voted to walk through there. That's not safe. That can't be safe. We're not going to do it. The committee would have voted no. Moses said go. They would have said no. He said go. He did get a committee together. Remember at the Jordan River, the first time they got there, they got a committee together and the committee said no. Joshua and Caleb said go, but the committee said no. Listen, you've got to be humble, but you've got to be in charge. That's what people will remember. People will follow someone who is able to, in humility, still lead, still be the one that makes the tough calls and doesn't always hide behind a committee or a group. You've got to be someone who could be in charge. You've got to be the Imago Dei. You've got to be the ministry of presence. You've got to be in charge, because leadership is by leader, not by committee. Now watch, Deuteronomy chapter 31, right at the end of his life. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I'm now 120 years old. Remember that? 3 sets of 40. I'm now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified of them because of them. The Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Can you hear what's going on in Moses' voice? Moses knows he's done. He knows he's done, and yet he knows that the nation is not done. He knows he cannot continue to lead, but God is still with them. And so what does he do? He says, look, I'm done. I'm too old to do this anymore. But you know what? God's not done with you. God's got a land for you. God's got a promise for you. And by the way, God's got a leader for you. Watch. Be the Imago Dei. Be the image of God, the ministry of presence. Be in charge, because leadership is by leader, not by committee. And listen to me. Listen. Be first, not last. Be the first, not the last. You say, well, what do you mean by that? Be the first leader, not the last leader. If you don't build something that will outlive you, you might be the first leader and you might be the last leader. But choose not to be the last one. Choose not to be the last one by raising up leaders around you, by raising up leaders to go before you, by raising up leaders who can step into your place when you're done. Plan succession. Be the first, not the last, and you do that by planning succession. God had put Joshua around Moses the entire time that the nation of Israel has left, from the time they left Egypt. Joshua has been right there the whole time. Joshua's been watching. Joshua's been leading the armies. Joshua's been fighting the battles. Joshua's been listening to Moses. He's been learning. Moses has developed in Joshua the obvious next leader, the obvious successor. And Moses does not fight against that. Moses admits it when he's done, but says, I may be done, but I am not the last leader you will have. Let me show you, Joshua. And why is it going to work with Joshua? Because God is going to go before you and before him. God's going to speak to him just like God spoke to me. Joshua can lead you because God's going to lead Joshua. Moses plans it this way. So many times, I don't know, I think leaders think they're immortal and they'll just be there forever and they don't plan for any succession. So many times we have churches that when the pastor leaves, there's nobody set up to lead. There's nobody trained to lead. So many times you see businesses that just shut down because they've not planned to pass the business on. There's no succession plan. Plan for succession. You might be the first, but you don't want to be the last. You want to plan to have some. Look, if you're the last great leader your organization has, that is not a badge of honor. That means you messed it up. That means you didn't plan for somebody to take over after you. You don't want to be the last leader. You don't want to be the last great leader. You want somebody you trained to lead way beyond what you just did. Moses never took the promised land, but Joshua did. And Moses could take pride in that. Moses could know. Moses' legacy marched across that Jordan in the person of Joshua. And that's who we've got to be. We've got to be someone that sets this up. We got to be the Imago Dei, the ministry of presence. We got to be in charge, humbly in charge, because leadership is by leader, not by committee. We've got to be the first, not the last. And that means we got to plan for succession. And then we got to be the name that they want to remember, because they don't have to. You got to be the name they want to remember. I want to show you something. Then Moses, I'm in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 through 6. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said I will give it to your descendants. I've let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He, God, buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. And though it doesn't say it here, and then they moved on. Look, you've got to be the name they want to remember, because they don't have to. You say, well, what are you saying to me? I need everybody to catch this, okay? Stay with me on this, because I'm afraid I'm going to freak somebody out, but just stay with me and hear me out. You and I, like Moses, we're headed to an unmarked grave. We're not building any of this to our own glory. Look, whether you're building a church or whether you're building a business or any other organization, you're not building it to your own glory. Remember, we're not building monuments, we're building movements. Monuments are to the memories of men. Movements are to the glory of God. And we've got to build a movement that outlives us. I may be headed to an unmarked grave, but if people can look and see, I don't know, a movement of church planting that somehow came out from where my church was. Somebody here, can I tell you my goal? One day I want somebody to walk into Southern Maryland and say, where did all these churches come from? And you know what I want the answer to be? I don't know. They're just here. There's a bunch of them, aren't there? Wow, somebody must have done something. Years ago, when I first went to my first solo pastorate in Hickory, North Carolina, I sat down behind my desk. I wasn't sure what to do that first few weeks. Inside the desk was a photo album of all the churches in our district, and had a picture of every church and its pastor at the current time, which was in the 70s. And it showed the church, and then it named all the pastors that had ever served that church. And I began to flip through it because I wanted to know what had happened, what was the district about, how this worked. And I began to come across the same name. Over and over and over again, I came across the same name. And it dawned on me, this one guy, whose name I had never heard, and to be honest with you at this moment, whose name I cannot recall, this one guy had planted like a third of the churches in the entire district. He'd planted so many churches, and I didn't know his name until that moment. And then it dawned on me, that's who I want to be. I want to be the guy that maybe they don't remember my name, but because of the work I did, they remember the image of God, and they remember how to lead humbly, and they remember that God is the one who will see them through. And the ones who know what happened, what God did, they'll want to remember my name. But it won't matter whether they do or not, because what we leave behind is a movement to the glory of God. I want to beg you, lead. Oh, dear God, lead. Lead well. Lead large. Lead more. But don't lead with the goal of leaving a monument to the memory of a man. Lead to the goal of leaving a movement to the glory of God.